Today I just want to do a quick update. I did the full breakdown of Spurs versus the Lakers, and like I mentioned there, pretty much everything was encapsulated in that game from the previous games. And pretty much everything I said there remains true. But today I just want to basically discuss three topics. One is going to be Lonzo versus Rondo, which I think is going to be a pretty continuing topic for pretty much the rest of the year. Or at least until one of them gets traded, or I don't know what's going to happen. But as well, I want to discuss Luke Walton being on the hot seat, and then I'm just going to discuss some of the trends from other games. That's pretty much what I'll start out with. Basically, from the other games into this Portland game they just played this Portland game. Today's Sunday, so they played Portland yesterday. Tonight they'll end up playing I think it's Toronto. But from the Portland game, some takeaways, some fixes, if you will. Before that game, something big that happened, big news, is Tyson Chandler was bought out of his contract with the Suns. So what's expected, I don't know if this has been finalized yet or not as of me recording this, but it could be the case that Tyson Chandler is already playing for the Lakers. That is a huge improvement because one of their major concerns that I mentioned, but again, I said it was an easy fix. It ended up being an even easier fix than what I thought it was going to be, was getting a backup center on a team, a backup big. And another big thing that happened basically towards the same problem was they actually played Zubac during this Portland game, and he didn't play so well that maybe you say, oh man, it was amazing. You could start him on another team. It wasn't that good, but it was good enough to where he could play solid minutes during the regular season, and during the playoffs, if you had to get somebody out, he could play. So he could play well enough. He has the size. I mean, obviously, he needs to add some other skills. He's not going to be out there shooting threes, probably. He's not going to be out there putting 20 and 10 up. But he could come off the bench and give you just something to think about when the other point guards go to the basket. When JaVale McGee's out of the game, he's going to give him something to think about going to the basket, having a 7-foot-plus guy under there. He's going to give Rondo and Lance Stevenson in the second lineup a pick-and-roll option. Rondo hitting on a couple good rolls to the basket yesterday, so he's already shown that he could play that position well enough. And I'm not really sure what the update is on Mo Wagner yet, but especially with having those two centers on the team now, if they have Chandler, who's a little bit older, but can obviously come in and give you minutes, backing up McGee, and then you have Zubac, who showed that he could play a little bit, that allow Mo Wagner basically being younger and just now getting in lineup when she comes back from injury. If they actually decide to insert him at any point, he can go to power forward and basically kind of see basically what he could do without having to have the pressure of being the sole backup center. So right there, that problem, we can't say at this point it's completely solved because it's pretty early. They just now kind of made these changes, but as of right now, it looks like they at least moved forward with that problem. A couple of other things from the other games was the rotations, but I think I'll kind of leave that. And another thing that I noticed from the previous games was like player specific. So you talk about Rondo and Lonzo. So what I think I'll do now is kind of move on to the other thing that I want to discuss, which was Lonzo versus Rondo. Basically, Lonzo has been getting the start the last few games, basically since Rondo has been back. And some takeaways here are that Lonzo Ball still has some fairly significant issues with his game. I'm not saying that he can't solve those issues, but they're pretty tremendous. Because a lot of people are kind of praising him. Some people was calling him a bust. Some people was praising him, I think, way too much and ignoring his issues. And I think a really tough situation is this Lonzo versus Rondo. And one of the things that makes it tough is because I think if either one of them was off the team, we wouldn't have much of a problem. But Lonzo, basically, I mean, regardless of whether he was going to have a good season or he was going to just totally have a bad season. I'm not saying he's a bad player. I'm not saying he's a great player. I'm just saying, regardless, being able to be the sole starter and say, we're with you, good or bad. You're going to play through your good times. You're going to play through your bad times. That option kind of totally got eliminated once Rondo was on the roster. And you could look at the same thing for Rondo. Instead of Rondo coming in and saying, we want a veteran point guard. We need you to start. We need you to lead this team. he's having to basically play a backup role at this point in the season. So for basically either one of them has a bad situation here. If you noticed me discussing in the previous games, Lonzo Ball has gotten significantly better at hitting catch and shoot threes. In this last game versus Portland, he actually struggled with that. I think he might have went 1 for 4, maybe 1 for 5. Not necessarily sure what the exact stats are on this, but he missed some open threes, some catch and shoot threes, and some pull up threes. He also missed driving pull up mid range that was, pretty bad. It kind of barely clinked off the front of the rim for a pull up mid range, and those are some huge holes in his game. That and defensively is still the same problems left over that I discussed in the previous video. He's still struggling to go around screens, and he's still struggling kind of on communications, which that's the whole team's issue maybe, but it seems like, sometimes it starts with him. It starts with him kind of being out of position or getting beat off the dribble, and then it kind of leads to the rest of the team in their rotations, having to make like tougher rotations than they would if he was playing more solidly on defense. So that's an issue. But Rondo, on the other hand, has shown extremely quickly from the previous games that he could adjust his game. Because at the beginning of the season, I was 100% trade Rondo, let it kind of be Lonzo's team, or why did you bring Rondo in? A lot of people would mention this. But Rondo, after he came back from the suspension, pretty much fixed his problems. Basically overnight. Because, he got suspended, he came back. Before, he was doing certain things. He was slowing the ball up. I think Charles Barkley mentioned it, that they play faster with Lonzo. Another thing that was mentioned, or has always been mentioned with Rondo, or two things. One, he's not a very impressive shooter. And two, his turnovers. And his turnovers are still, he's basically higher risk and high reward. Sometimes he'll make passes that you're like, whoa, that's a great pass. He gets other guys involved very well. He's able to control the game and make sure that each possession you either get a bucket by him, an assist by him, or somebody's getting fouled on him passing, or he gets fouled. And that's good. That's what you want. You want valuable possessions like that every time down the court, and that's something that he's always been shown to be able to give you. But then on the other side of it, sometimes that through making tough passes, you get turnovers, or through gambling, you get turnovers. But that kind of weighs itself out. But as far as pace, he's shown, especially in this Portland game, if you watch it, he's shown an ability to speed the game up when it needs to be sped up, and to slow it down when it needs to be slowed down, in order to maximize the production of fast break points versus set offensive points in the half court when they need it. Also, he's shown over the last few games, really, that he's able to hit the three. For the season, I think he's at 50% from the three ball. Last night, I think he was 80% even overall from the floor. That's amazing, especially for a guy who people thought, maybe wrongly thought that he was not that great of a shooter. He's not a shooter, but he's shown that he could hit a shot when left open, and that's what you need. And in comparison to Lonzo, he's shown that he could hit a mid-range, which he did last night, a pull-up, fadeaway mid-range shot he hit, and he's shown that he's able to hit pretty tough layups going to the basket. So that's pretty much it with Lonzo versus Rondo. I don't want to spend too much time on it. I can move on to the Luke Walton. And a lot of people have been saying Luke Walton shouldn't be on the hot seat at this point, after it was released that he basically got blasted by Magic Johnson after a slow start. And I think that he deserved to be on it because of his rotations. And some people think that improved. But basically, the only thing that he did differently last night with his rotations was put Zubac in at center, which I thought was good. But there's still other things, related things to Luke Walton, that still happened last night, despite them getting the huge win that was pretty much propelled forward by Rondo's playing extremely well. One of the things that I think that they're doing now that's extremely detrimental is playing Brandon Ingram in for Hart, who won Caldwell Pope's position at shooting guard. Uh, the way they play, a lot of times, and this is another problem, is with LeBron at point. That's a separate problem. I could discuss that in a second. But LeBron at point, Lonzo basically at the 2, Ingram at the 3. So you basically have a small forward or a guy who's supposed to be playing small forward at the 1, and then a small forward at the 3 position, and then Kuzma and JaVale McGee. What that does is effectively takes one of your small forwards and plugs them in for the shooting guard, even though they're not playing shooting guard. It plugs them in for a shooting guard. So now, instead of having a shooting guard starting shooting guard and a small forward on the bench to sub in, you now have KCP, who used to start shooting guard. He's on the bench. You have Lance Stevenson, who started shooting guard in his career, is now kind of a 6-man role. He could play shooting guard. He's coming off the bench. Then you have Hart, who's been starting shooting guard this year, and replaced KCP, basically won his starting position this year. He's coming off the bench. So there's 3 starting caliber shooting guards coming off the bench, while you have 0 at this point viable options that maybe Beasley's on the team, could play small forward, but in comparison to Ingram, you're downgraded at that position by starting Ingram. And this, you could kind of see like the problems that this had, because last night their starters ran a long time into the game, usually around sometimes as soon as like 4 minutes into the game, 5 minutes into the game. But especially by 6 or 7 minutes, you start seeing them being pulled. They were in there maybe like 7, 8 minutes, maybe even longer than that, before Lance Stevenson ended up coming in for Ingram, which I think is also kind of a bad move, because I think you should put Lance Stevenson in for probably Lonzo Ball, maybe even at that point, or also bring Rondo or someone else, because Stevenson was basically out there. I think they might have went down 5 points or something like that when Luke Walton basically decided to sub Lance for Ingram, and the drought basically continued. Lance was out there fresh, but the other guys weren't fresh. At this point, I can't even remember what the time was, but like I said, it was like 8, almost 9 minutes when he finally decided to start subbing. And other guys, basically, besides Lance, weren't fresh. They didn't have that energy to bring. Like, you need your bench to bring energy. And then what he ended up having to do was finally, once they were down 10 points and he had to sub again, subbing Rondo and I think maybe Hart and KCP at a certain point. And that's when he brought Zubac in at the backup. And that's a 4-guard lineup. There's no small forward or person to run small forward. You basically got Lance Stevenson, who's a combo guard. He likes to play point guard. He likes to run a pick and roll. He likes to ISO from the perimeter. You got Rondo, who's basically a pure point guard. You got Hart, who's basically a shooting guard, and KCP's a shooting guard. Both of them can play point guard, but neither one of them can play small forward very well. And on defense, you're kind of okay, especially given now that you have Zubac in the game. But prior to that, you saw how they really struggled with that lineup. And depending on which team you play, if you play a team with a lot better small forward, because Portland's doesn't have Kawhi Leonard on the team. They don't have like Rudy Gay or DeMar DeRozan like the Spurs had, or they don't have a Jimmy Butler or Andrew Wiggins like the Timberwolves. They don't have. The guy they have in is okay, but he's not great. He's not really athletic. He's not a scorer. He's not their primary scorer. CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard at the guard position as their primary scorers. So with a team like Portland, you might be able to get away with that. Against other teams, you won't always be able to get away with that. That's why I think that having Brandon Ingram coming off the bench would effectively solve that problem, because Brandon Ingram coming off the bench, you got Brandon Ingram could come in for basically 2 through 5. He could come in for LeBron. He could come in for Kuzma. He could come in for McGee and basically go like a little smaller lineup if you want to do that for a brief moment. He could come in basically, even for Lonzo, if you put basically Rondo in the game as well, or if Stevenson's already in the game at shooting guard, you could, and then he could go to point, and then Ingram could go to the two. So there's tons of different flexibility and options you have with Ingram coming off the bench versus you have him starting. And I think that's a major problem. And it's a tough spot, really, to tell someone like Brandon Ingram that they can't start. But I think it's very necessary if you want to build a rotation that's going to work out against multiple different teams in multiple different situations. But like I said, if you have Ingram that could come in for all those positions, then you have Lance Stevenson can come in at the point guard. You have Rondo could come at the point guard, and Lance could go to the two. They could switch that off. Your rotation opens up so much more with that. And then you don't have a position where you have to play four guards because Ingram's tired because he's just played all these minutes. He can't stay in the game for the entire first quarter just because he wants to start. I mean, he's young, maybe he actually could, but it's going to be detrimental to your team if he ends up having to play defense tough, then offense tough. I mean, something's got to give there. And putting him in, either him or Kuzma, either one of them, because they don't really have a backup power forward besides Williams either. So um, either forward coming off the bench would help the team tremendously just in terms of rotations. And you can see that later in the game as well, where Ingram's playing a lot with LeBron. And that's another issue that I could bring up, Luke Walton. I think at one point he actually was trying to stagger their minutes. So I don't know if this is something that he realizes or not, but I think I saw maybe in an article, I can't remember with what sports news it was, but that had Ingram at like 75% shooting versus like maybe like 40 something or lower even when LeBron's in the game versus LeBron's out of the game. So Ingram's production can potentially go up when LeBron's not in the game. Basically with two small forwards, one trying to play point guard, the other one trying to play small forward. His production can go up. And if you could have his production up and then the option to bring LeBron in also, like, so towards the end of the games, one of the things that I think could work would be starting LeBron at the beginning of the quarter, like your starters. Like Ingram's not a starter, but then let him play. Bring in at like the 8-minute mark or so, maybe even earlier. Bring Ingram in, or maybe later even. Bring Ingram in. Sit LeBron during the middle of the fourth. Don't bring him in too early. Don't bring him in too late. But kind of give him a minute and then a good amount of time within the middle of the fourth quarter, as you saw with Denver. Lance Stevenson came in the middle of the fourth. LeBron was sitting on the bench. That's when they came back. Lance Stevenson hit those 2 threes. I think he drove to the basket and hit a shot. I think Hart hit 2 free throws. They were tied at that point. LeBron comes back in the game. Stevenson hits LeBron. LeBron hits that dunk, and I mean the roof comes off the place, and all the momentum, and it was able to close out the game. Similar things happened. Obviously versus Dallas, you could obviously see they lost a huge lead at the end of the game. Against Portland this time when LeBron came back in, they had, I don't know if there's up 20, 17, 14. They were up by a significant amount of points in the fourth quarter and ended up losing that lead. But then LeBron at the end of the game was able to close out and make a couple plays going towards the basket, get fouled, obviously. Once the other team was down, he hit some free throws. So he's shown that he could close, but I mean, they have been losing leads, and we've seen success with LeBron sitting on the bench during the fourth. Against the Suns as well. The Suns, they were up significantly. They didn't lose that lead. They kept it throughout the fourth. When LeBron was pretty much on the bench, I don't know if he was on the bench the entire fourth versus the Suns. I mean, the Suns is not a great team, so, but I mean, they're there with the Mavs. I mean, the Mavs aren't neither one of them are projected to be at the top of the Western Conference, so they're both pretty much projected to be probably lottery teams, not making the playoffs. We'll see at the end of the year what happens, but I mean, they're roughly similar teams. Maybe the Mavs are a little bit better, but in any case, what happened during the Suns and the Mavs completely different. So I guess that's pretty much all that I wanted to talk about. I don't think I rambled in for too long, maybe a 20-minute video or something like that, but that's pretty much it. I could add a little bit more in. Actually, no, I won't. That's it for today. Um, we'll watch the Toronto game, and then I might come back with another video after that to see what happens after that game.